it was February. I was living in Minnesota. It was very cold, and this company that is in the desert sent me a LinkedIn message asking if I might be interested in interviewing for a job. And I'm like, well, if nothing else, I'll get a couple days in the desert and it'll be warm and nice. And so they flew me down to Yuma, and during the interview process, they drove me out into the date groves and the fields, and I kind of fell in love with it. And so they offered me the product manager role at the time. And, I took it. We packed up the family and we moved to Arizona.
Welcome to Behind the Fruit. Today I'm joined by David Baxter, CEO of Natural Delights. David, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
So to kick us off, it'd be great if you can just give us more of a quick introduction to both yourself and Natural Delights for anyone who may be not that familiar to the business.
Sure. So David Baxter, CEO of Natural Delights. I've been with the company for about 8 years now. And Natural Delights is the number one brand of Medjool dates in the U.S. And so we grow them all in Arizona, California, and Mexico. And that's kind of where our headquarters out, and we sell the product all over the world as of today.
Brilliant. So tell us a little bit more about then where you're exporting to at the moment.
Yeah, so we our key export markets are Southeast Asia, and then Australia, New Zealand, and then Japan and other Middle East countries, as well as Europe. There's a lot of value of the Medjool date that comes from the U.S. just because of the microclimate that we have where it grows. It produces a product better than what they can grow over in the Middle East. It's a little bit more higher quality.
Why is that then? Why is it higher quality?
I think it's because of our access to water. So the water, Colorado River kind of runs through the Yuma area, which is kind of where our main growing region is, which is the very southwest corner of Arizona. And so because of that water availability, the trees get as much as they need, which provides kind of a plumper, more tender, softer date, versus in the Middle East, they tend to be very dry and hard. So not quite as nice of an eating experience.
Nice. No, I mean, makes sense, definitely. So before we'll talk about more about the company, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about you and your background, because you haven't always been in produce. Obviously, you started with a degree in engineering. You went into facilities management, an MBA, General Mills, and it's been a few companies outside of produce before you eventually went into the produce industry. So could you tell us a little bit more about that in terms of like where you grow up, your background, and what life looked like before you actually went into produce?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Southeast Michigan, just outside of Detroit area. And my parents were always in the business world. My dad was a CFO and my mom was a manager at the Detroit newspaper. So I was always around business in some sense. But from a young age, I liked taking things apart and doing things. So it kind of got me into the engineering world. And so I went to Western Michigan University and got a degree in engineering management, which is really more aligned with industrial engineering, like how to run a manufacturing plant and stuff like that. And I graduated in 2008 during the Great Recession. And so there were not a lot of jobs in Michigan around engineering at the time. And so I had actually had a couple of friends who moved out to California at the time, and I thought it'd be fun to go join them. And so I started looking for jobs, and that's how I ended up in the facilities management world. I found that job through a former alum from my degree who also went out there to do that job for a company called ABM Facilities Management, which was really cool because being in the Bay Area, I got to work at a lot of really cool tech companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, mainly Yahoo. And then I did some other work up and down the West Coast for like Starbucks and Jet Propulsion Labs at NASA.
Interesting.
So that little job of facilities management, making sure all these buildings were clean, took me to some really interesting places. and got to see how a lot of different companies, were structured and operated and stuff like that.
Yeah, I suppose
Um,
from the outset, because facilities management doesn't sound the most exciting, but as soon as you throw that in, that you're going to, working with all these big names, like you say, get to understand the organizations, then yeah, it must have been an amazing experience.
yeah, and a lot of them treated us just like we are part of their staffing, part of their employees. So we got a lot of the same, cool perks and stuff like that that they had
Yeah,
out there, which was kind of cool.
cool.
But at the end of the day, facilities management was not the most glamorous
Right.
job. You can only walk into so many bathrooms to make sure they're clean until you're like, I wonder what's next for me in my career. So, while I was out there, I happened to meet my wife while working at Yahoo, which, usually when we tell people that, they think they're like, Yahoo had a dating site. Like, no, no, at their actual corporate campus is where we met.
Oh, nice.
We got married, and as we looked to what we wanted to do next, I wanted to go and get my MBA. And so had our sights on going back to the Midwest, where I'm originally from and where her parents were originally from, Minnesota and Sioux Falls. And so I picked the University of Minnesota because they had a really good reputation for their part-time MBA program, and I knew I wanted an MBA, but I didn't want to go full-time because, again, just got married, wanted to have some income and supporting, a new family. And so we moved. I started the MBA program, and then very shortly after that, got a job at General Mills, starting off in their marketing program, which um, was new to me. I had never really thought about marketing, and the job that I had there in marketing was really, they called it their holistic margin management program, which was really a cost savings program. But their approach to it was unique because it was always positioned as consumer first cost savings. Like, how can we take costs out of this without impacting the consumer experience?
Mhm.
And so that was and that's why marketing ran it, because marketing was so much closer to the consumer, right? As a marketer, you know what the consumer values and what they don't, and how to go and test for that. And so that's really how I got into the marketing career path. When I started my MBA program, I thought I would do finance. Again, CFO dad, going down that route.
Yeah, yeah.
And then General Mills very quickly changed my mind on going into marketing as I looked at that company and saw that, the people actually running the company all came through the marketing discipline.
Mm.
The CEO was a former marketer, the COO was a former marketer, and just realizing that marketing was more than advertising. Again, having an engineering degree, I didn't get a lot of the business in undergrad, so it was all kind of new to me. And seeing that, I knew I always wanted to be in upper leadership. Um, and so that's kind of how I landed in the marketing role and spent about 3 years at General Mills, mainly working on Yoplait. And then as I graduated my MBA program, or was about wrapping up, obviously those changes facilitate looking at other things outside. And while General Mills was great, opportunity at a company called Flagstone opened itself to kind of advance my career a little bit. And so I moved over to Flagstone, which they focused on trail mix and snack bars and snack nuts and stuff like that. And it was mainly private label, which was very new to me.
Different. Yeah.
Going from big General Mills brand to private label was kind of a culture change, just on how you work with retailers, how you work with your sales team. And it's very much driven by the retailer instead of driven by the company to the consumer.
Mm.
Um, so it was kind of good to get that well-rounded both sides of, branded as well as private label.
Would you say it's more
Um,
complex in that respect than in private label, more driven by the retailers?
yeah, I think it is more complex because, you're at the mercy of a retailer and their bid schedule. So you could be selling Costco, their number one snack nut brand or product, and it's a private label item, and they could switch vendors. And from a consumer standpoint, nobody notices because it's the same
Mm.
label branding, but all of a sudden you have this gap in your business, right? That is hard to fill with somebody like a Costco.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a little bit more risky to go all private label. Um, which ultimately led me to the next move over to Bellisio Foods. I really wanted to get back into um, a branded offering. And so I went over to Bellisio Foods, and their main brands were Michelina's frozen foods and Boston Market and some other branded items. And so I landed there. I wasn't there very long until, it was February. I was living in Minnesota. It was very cold, and this company that is in the desert sent me a LinkedIn message asking if I might be interested in interviewing for a job. And I'm like, well, if nothing else, I'll get a couple days in the desert and it'll be warm and nice. And so they flew me down. So they flew me down to Yuma, and during the interview process, they drove me out into the date groves and the fields, and um, talking about how they were the number one brand in their category and growing significantly, and doing a lot of exciting things. And I kind of fell in love with it. And so they offered me the product manager role at the time. And, I took it. We packed up the family and we moved to Arizona. And I've been working for them ever since. I think that was in 2018.
Mhm.
Um, but luckily, the one good thing for me that came out of COVID was, we all went remote and I was able to relocate back to Michigan with the family. And now we get to live near family and friends again while I get to keep the job that I really like. So
Nice,
that's
nice.
kind of the high level background.
So you said that obviously you got the opportunity to get to go and interview. It's in the desert. You went and fell in love with it. I mean, what was it about it at that time that really drew you in?
Yeah, I think it's just seeing the care that the company had for the growers themselves and how closely we got to work with the growers, and working for a product that is essentially coming off the trees, getting sorted and going into a package, and there's no processing, there's no formulation, there's no additives. It's just a very healthy, natural product, and I could get behind that because it's something that I value. And so I really thought of it like, if I'm gonna work and market a product, working on one that you know I enjoy as well as can see the value in for consumers makes it that much easier. It's not a requirement to market a product that you love, but it certainly helps.
I suppose it'd be very interesting for people that are listening, particularly that have a marketing background, to know that there is that possibility to go through into eventually a CEO or similar position. So, talk to us about how your role has progressed within the business to the CEO position.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. So Lisa started as a product manager, and about 4 months after joining the company, they kind of went through a small reorganization. They put new leadership in charge in the CEO role of the company, and as part of that, they moved me into a brand manager role to kind of take a more of a leadership over all of the marketing program. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then really that evolved into becoming the director of marketing. So really owning the whole program. And then from there, I started to get more ingrained with the sales team and understanding their sales process, and starting to work very closely on how can I make the sales team marketers and how can I make marketers salespeople, because they're so intertwined. They need to know each other's jobs and to know how they can support each other. And so that kind of moved me into the business development role where I was really working closely with the sales team while still leading the marketing team, and making sure that everything that we were putting out in terms of innovation, merchandising, brand support, all had a cohesive kind of look and feel and value to the retail partners. And then our VP of sales and marketing retired at the end of our last season. So that would have been August of 2025. And so with him retiring, he had been kind of grooming me to move up and take over his role. So I did that for a while. And so I was kind of the number two in the company right behind the CEO at the time. And then that CEO decided to leave as well. And so he moved over to actually went with one of our competitors. So we still work together on a different basis, but he's still around. But then, the growers kind of selected me to run the company because I kind of had the longest tenure, the most experience, and they knew me well. And so they gave me the opportunity to kind of step into the CEO role. And I've been doing that for almost 6 months now, which is that's gone by very fast.
Yeah, I can imagine. So still, I suppose you still, do you feel like it is still, I wouldn't say new, but are you still learning, still finding your feet, etc.?
Yeah, it's been different than any previous CEO because I have the challenge, let's say, of kind of redirecting the company. So one of our larger growers happened to leave to go and kind of start their own brand and do their own thing. And so because of that, because we are a co-op of growers, our job is to sell and market the fruit that we have. So we're not buying fruit off of, any external growers or markets, foreign markets or anything like that. So we only have access to what we grow. And so our volume took a significant hit. So it took some real quick and decisive action on how to reposition the company to the new reality of what our volume was going to be.
Had that happened just as you stepped into CEO role or around the time? Or
Yeah, so it's been kind of in the background for a little while now, but I think with the CEO leaving, the former CEO leaving and moving over with that growing group, it became more of a urgency
mm,
to act now. I think we had been moving a little bit slow before that, so I was happy to be in the role so that I could, impact that and make us go faster and redirect it. And now as we're heading into our new season here in August, which is when our new year starts, I feel pretty confident in our team and our customer base and very well aligned with what we're growing and what we have access to what we'll be able to sell. And so, being able to move very quickly at the beginning, right as I stepped into the role was very helpful instead of like if things were to draw out longer, then we might miss something or customers might not be as confident or, you know, there'd be other roadblocks ahead of us. Cause at the end of the day, to keep the customers that we could keep, the goal really was to make them comfortable and make sure they know that we're going to continue to grow. This is a setback for sure, but it won't impact anything on how we operate with our customer base. We're still going to promote. We're still going to lead the marketing charge. We're still going to have volume to serve you this year and for years to come and continue to help you grow. And so it's been fun to kind of get in front of all these customers and go through all that.
what would you say have been the biggest sort of learnings, I guess, of stepping into the role? What are the areas you've had to really focus on that have been maybe quite a big transition or even a challenge, would you say?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me as formerly being over just sales and marketing, right? And now stepping into this role that oversees everything. I worked with the finance teams and customer service and logistics and planning ops, but I was never overseeing them. So really learning everybody's job and what they're doing and what they need to be supported so that they can be the best at their job and uh, has been a little bit of a challenge because I went from like 4 direct reports to 18 essentially because that's how many people are in the company, and so that was probably one of the biggest like eye-opening things for me was learning all of that. And then I knew our growers, but it was on a less formal basis, and so then being the main contact for our growers and that community as well has been, I wouldn't say a challenge, but a learning curve and just learning all their personalities and what do they value and what strategic direction do they want to take the company? Because at the end of the day, as a co-op, it is their company and I'm here to serve them and make sure that I'm helping them achieve whatever goals that they have through our sales and marketing program.
We do have quite a lot of conversations around people that are looking to step into a CEO position, and maybe they've come from a finance background or commercial, for example, and they're always looking on how they can expand their skill set to eventually step into the CEO role, because a lot of companies do want people that have overseen all functions, which obviously, makes sense. So I suppose with you coming in as CEO and having your background has been sales and marketing, is there anything you could have done differently in the past in hindsight to help you develop that knowledge? Or do you think it's one of those that you just have to learn as it comes, I guess?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always point to is, when people ask me how did I get here? How'd you do it? 40 years old, CEO. I never said no to a lot of opportunities to do something, even if it was outside of my job purview or whatever. I was more than willing to learn, even if it was just to support in a minor role, and always had my eyes and ears open as to what was going on. So while it was a challenge to manage these new roles at the CEO level, it's not that I wasn't aware of what they were doing or how they were doing it. It's more of the details that I got more familiar with in this role now. So I think just being open to doing things that are outside of your skill set and to create that more well-rounded overall business accoutrement and ownership and all of that is what gets people's attention, and being present and people see you, and they recognize that um you're offering more than just your specific kind of job.
Nice. And obviously, we talked earlier how Produce Business recognised you as so in their 40 under 40 class in 2022, I think it was. Is that right?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. So just 3 years into your time. So, what had you achieved by that point? Would you say that you were most proud of?
Yeah, I think it was kind of continuing to accelerate the growth that we had already been experiencing. So, Medjool dates were a very, very niche product when I started. My first experience with a Medjool date was actually in the Middle East. I went to Abu Dhabi and Dubai as my MBA program study abroad portion. So I spent a month in the Middle East. That was the first time I had ever had a date.
Nice.
And
Must have
so
left
it's kind of
tired.
fun to, well, kind of connect those dots.
Yeah.
Um, but in terms of what I achieved is, well, a few things. One, I internalized our marketing program, so we used to work a lot with agencies, and I very quickly realized that there's a lot of not necessarily money waste. I think agencies are worth it, but you get less ownership coming from an agency. They've got their block of time that they're going to work on your business, and then they do whatever work is on their desk, and then they got to move to another client, right? When you internalize things and you have those dedicated staff, I think there's a little bit more ownership and loyalty and enthusiasm behind the brand that I think has led us to really accelerate our marketing program and has helped facilitate a lot of the growth in the category. From when I started to now, the amount of consumers in the US eating dates has actually more than doubled. In terms of consumer penetration, it was around 6%. Now we're north of 12. So seeing all of those things happen and being able to point to some of the work that we've done um, in terms of the marketing and sales efforts as the emphasis behind what caused that, I think is what ultimately got recognized and why I was selected for that class.
What did cause that then? Why? What was the reason for that increase in consumption?
Really, I think it's a lot of the marketing efforts we do. We before I took over the marketing program, the former person was strategy was very niche marketing the product as kind of a sports superfood and how to fuel athletes, and while that's all true, I think it was a little too narrow of a focus. So we kind of we stepped back and said, how do we focus on a broader population, and what value is this product bringing to the everyday consumer who might have aspirations to be a super athlete, but at the end of the day, they're, maybe taking a 30-minute walk or going for a, 2 mile run or something like that. They're not, running marathons or doing all of that. And so being able to focus on the everyday usage occasions so people become more familiar with the product and understand what is the value of it. And I think one of the big things is dates have a lot of sugar, but being able to educate consumers that while dates do have a lot of sugar, they also have a lot of fiber. And when you
Mm.
pair those two things, it's kind of like a superpower, because instead of the sugar spike and crash, you get this long sustained energy burn that the fiber um, produces when combined with the sugar. So being able to educate consumers on a lot of that, and then working with influencers and R&D, registered dietitians, and media people to get the product out in front of people more so, and on morning TV shows and online, creating a ton of recipes and digital content for social media, and just trying to do all of that. And then we are very beneficial that in the last few years, there's been a lot of like viral trends along dates in terms of, for a while there was the date Snickers, which is basically a date stuffed with peanut butter and chocolate chips. And then there was date bark, which
Right.
was smashed dates coated in chocolate and stuff like that. And so I think the more that we got dates out into the world, people started experimenting more with them, becoming more familiar with them. They were less scared of them. They can be a little bit intimidating from a visual aspect. A
Mm.
lot of people, have that, but understanding that, all right, I'm just going to try this and see if it's something that I like, even though it might look a little strange right now.
Yeah, do you know what? And now you've mentioned it, yes, I have seen a lot on social media, the health, yeah, content creators, I guess, sharing various versions of, date based desserts or whatever it might be, for health reasons. But I do know there are a lot of people that are scared of dates, so it's nice that you're able to change that through your marketing. Definitely. Going back to what you were saying before about the bringing your marketing in house, how were you able to do that? Were you, for example, did you have to hire in for different skill sets to be able to do that, or did you already have that within the business?
Yeah, we had to definitely bring on some people. So we hired two people. We hired one to focus on the consumer side and one person to focus on the trade side. And really, it was a cost justification at the time. You pay an agency X number of dollars to hire these two people would be X number of dollars, and the night and day savings is very clear when you just put it on paper and look at it very logically like that. And then you've got a full-time staff person. So you're not only saving money, you're ultimately getting, again, that loyalty, that focus, that energy that is behind the brand 100% of the time of their working time, right? So there was a lot of cost benefit review, and ultimately doing that was very successful. We do still work with a PR agency just because we can't hire for every skill set within the marketing, but I hired kind of the general marketers who could go out and work with an ad agency to place ads, or work with a PR agency, to run the PR programs. And so it's not that we completely got away from agencies; we just got away from kind of that core agency that would then go out and do those things on our behalf.
Hmm. And when you hire within the marketing team or at that time, do you typically look for people with produce experience or just branded experience, or is there anything particular that tends to work?
Yeah, I think for me in hiring, I'm not necessarily looking for produce experience. Um, I'm looking for culture fit first, and do they fit within the team? Do they have a similar way of working? Are they going to, mesh well with the rest of the team? Because being in a small company, we wear a lot of different hats. We do a lot of different things, and sometimes we need to step into areas that aren't our role. And so it would be hard to hire somebody in who's like, all right, I am doing this one job and I'm going to stay in my lane and I don't want to get out of it. That's kind of what we need first at a company like this, and then look for the very tactical. Can they do the job after that? Right? Do they have the skills, the leadership, the cross functional management necessary to continue to grow and develop this program to where we want it to ultimately go? So that could come from anywhere. That could come from outside of food, inside of food. It can come from produce. So where they come from isn't necessarily um, the important factor in making a hiring decision.
How do you assess somebody for culture fit? Is there anything in specific you do, or is it just something that you get a sense, during the interview process?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few questions that I like to throw at people, and one is, if we're experiencing a crisis and it's all hands on deck, like how comfortable are you jumping into areas that are outside of your purview? Like, how would you handle the situation where X, Y, and Z is needed and stuff like that? But at the end of the day, I trust my gut quite a lot. And so if I get that good feeling about somebody and what they're saying, and I leave the conversation feeling like, man, I'd love to. I wish that could have gone on longer. Um, is kind of what I look to kind of ultimately make the decision, as well as feedback from the rest of the team who's interviewing these people as well.
So just that natural connection, I guess, just naturally being able to get on with somebody. If it's difficult, then
Yes.
it's not going to be
Yeah.
right, essentially. So, I want to talk again about the growers that you mentioned previously, because I know Natural Delights has recently welcomed a new growing partner, through the Naturally Grown Growers Association. So, what does that kind of grower relationship mean for the brand, and why does it matter how the fruit gets to market?
Yeah. So first and foremost, bringing them in was is really helped us shore up our volume for the next year. So they'll bring in around 2 million pounds for us, which is great. But they bring in so much more than that, just because they are a Mexican grower and they're very well connected down in Mexico, where kind of our third growing region, if you consider kind of Coachella, Yuma, and Mexico as the three regions that grow Medjool dates. And so their connections to a lot of the other growers down there could lead to future opportunities to continue to bring in new growers to the association, which ultimately is my biggest charge is how do we continue to get more growers in, get volume back and grow. But they also are bringing in some really world-class production facilities and operations where they'll be able to support us in terms of all of the operational steps as well. And so they can, grade and sort for us. They'll be able to pack and process and do other operations on that side of it as well that will help us kind of manage demand and be able to react to our seasonality better, which dates are a very seasonal item. We have the holidays and then Ramadan are kind of our two big seasons. So we'll actually see it here in August, September. The volume starts ramping up for the holidays and stuff like that. But anyways, so it's very important to bring in growers like that, and they can add a lot of value to us um, through everything that they can offer, as well as just industry experience. One thing that people will say about me is, I listen well and I take feedback well and direction. And so bringing in somebody with other experience, my ears are always open. Like, how would you approach this? How would you do this? What do you think we should do here? And so just being able to have another um, grower to bounce ideas off of and talk through strategies and stuff like that is very helpful.
Nice. And we've talked obviously a lot about the growth of just dates in the US in general. But what do you think the future holds for the Natural Delights brand? Do you see that momentum continuing?
Yeah. So like I said, in 5 years, we've kind of doubled the category. And as of, I want to say the end of 2025, dates were actually the largest segment of the dried fruit category, which we overtook raisins last year, I think was the former number
Great.
one,
Really good.
which is very cool. So I definitely see that momentum continuing, especially in the US, where there's, again, 12% penetration means 78% of people or 88% of people aren't eating it. So, there's still a huge runway to continue to grow. And, with the grower who left, they'll be adding to that too. And, they're going to be doing their own marketing program. And I think the more that all of us can market and continue to get consumers more aware of the product, rising tides lift all boats kind of thing, right? So while they're competition, I'm not afraid of the competition. I think
Yeah, yeah.
I welcome it, and I hope we can all, work together to continue to grow this thing. But for the Natural Delights brand itself, I don't see us losing our number one spot anytime soon in the U.S. as the number one brand, and we're going to continue to do everything that we can from our side to make sure that we serve our retailers and we treat our employees well, and that we continue to market to consumers. And I think those three things done in coordination will just help us kind of continue to grow and maintain the trend that we've been on.
Do you see, are there any other markets in the world that are, again, growing in terms of their date consumption?
Yeah, so Japan is very up and coming. In terms of a market, there's some of the markets that we sell to are actually a lot more mature than we are in the US, like Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia, and other Muslim facing or primarily Muslim cultures.
Mhm.
But with Japan, we kind of introduced dates there, at least in terms of a true branded presence, um, through Costco Japan to start, and then we built that into working with some other other growers, and then we work with we work with a commodity board on international growth, and the Japanese market was one we identified that was had significant growth opportunity. Prunes were actually kind of the best number one dried fruit over there, and now dates are taking a lot of the share away from prunes as we've continued to grow there. So it's been very exciting to kind of see us not just sell more product, but really impact a culture and how they're interacting with fruits and dried fruits in general, and trying something new.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder how they're doing in the UK market because I don't know many people that eat dates. I know a few, but not that many. So
Yeah,
yeah,
they
yeah,
do decent. I think we sell them
yeah.
at let's say Tesco,
Right, yeah. Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. Of
it's in a private label offering.
course.
They don't they're less branded over there.
Course, yeah, yeah, it's quite different. So, okay, and I want to talk again from so you obviously came from outside of produce, moved into the produce industry, and obviously that's worked out for you. And I know companies, don't always want to hire from outside of the industry, but what are your thoughts about bringing in talent from other industries? Do you think that companies, are getting it wrong at all, or do you think it is just super challenging for people? Yeah, what's your view on that?
Uh, I think it's valuable because we all learn different things in different industries, right? If we only hired produce people, I think all of the produce brands that are now kind of starting to grow would still be very commoditized. And I think that's what I brought to Natural Delights is I came in and said, I want to make this a consumer packaged goods brand, not a produce brand, right? Because a CPG brand is one that's more focused on consumer communication and growing the brand and ensuring quality and things like that. Versus I think traditionally, maybe 15, 20 years ago in produce, it was like, how can I just sell my crop and get it out of the door and move it? And, um, especially with things like tomatoes or, shorter shelf life items where, I mean, salespeople they've got phones glued to their ear trying to move truckloads of product at a time. We have the very unique benefit of having a long shelf life. So we don't have to necessarily play that, we need every truck out of here within 7 days kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, and so that gives us the time to be a little bit more strategic and be a little bit more brand forward. And I think if they had hired somebody that would just coming from, say, a tomato produce company, they might not necessarily have that same view of let's build the brand and make sure consumers are valuing the brand and not just the product.
What do you think is the most challenging part though of moving somebody from outside the industry into produce? What are the main areas that are more challenging for them to learn?
I think the sales process, because in a lot of, at least in my experience in the larger companies like General Mills, it was very marketing driven and then sales executed. Being in a produce company is kind of the opposite almost, where the sales it's very sales driven, and there's the value is really the sales relationships with retail, and then marketing is there to support the sales versus sales is there to support the marketing. So we work very closely with our sales team to understand, all right, what is our retailers goals and objectives in terms of growth? Are they dollar growth based? Are they unit growth? And how do we work very closely with them to execute marketing programs specific to them versus like the larger consumer general marketing is less impactful versus, especially with a niche product, working at shelf and backwards in terms of marketing is really kind of how we approach it.
Have you seen anybody move in within the sales capacity, sales commercial, again from outside of the industry and moving straight into produce and it's worked?
I have not with sales.
Not with sales, yeah.
I'm sure it's happened, but I haven't seen it, and I
Yeah.
haven't had that conversation with anybody. But I have had people on my marketing team when I was the director of marketing move over to sales, and
Mm.
so she came from a outside. I think she was at a pet food company, and then we hired her to run trade marketing, and so she went pet food to produce marketing to produce sales, and so that's kind of a roundabout way, but that one would be challenging just because sales is still so relationship driven in produce that if you're going to hire a salesperson, you want somebody that actually has contacts and knows the buyers, knows the brokers, and knows who to talk to.
Mm.
And so a little different than on the marketing side where those contacts aren't necessarily as important. But if you know how to tell a good story and how to translate that story into something a salesperson can use for a retailer, then, that can come from anywhere, I think.
Yeah. I've definitely seen it. It's not something we've hired for. And I totally understand in terms of coming into a sales role. Like you say, if you haven't got the relationships, you don't know the product, and you don't fully understand the supply chain, then it's gonna be tough anyway. Unless you're
Yes.
coming at a very junior level, it's gonna be very tough. Yeah, I was wondering if you've seen it, but yeah, I think it does happen, but it's definitely rare in my experience. So when you stepped into the CEO role at the beginning of this year, how was that in terms of, your relationship with the team, being maybe a peer to then obviously stepping up into that position? How did you find that?
Yeah, a small team, so pretty good relationship with everybody even before this. I think a little bit of the change was more of now instead of a colleague, I'm essentially their boss, which is obviously a different relationship. But we were just down in South Carolina last week celebrating one of our employees who's retiring, and at one of the dinners, I made the comment of we are all friends who just happen to work together, and so there's not this emphasis on hierarchy and whatnot. Like anybody on the team, from the most junior person to the most senior, can call me and have a conversation, and they all feel um, very welcome in that. There's no like nerves around it. I know, like, if I were still at General Mills, I can't just call up the CEO and be like, "Hey, I got this problem or this question or need this resource or whatever." So my door is always open with this team, and that's ultimately why I think I've been here so long, is I really value the size of the company. Being a smaller company and having worked from the 17 billion down to where we are today is just a lot more rewarding to
Mhm.
um, see everything that happens and how I can impact people's careers and lives, and we get to be friends.
Yeah, no, it's nice. I'm glad that it wasn't too challenging. So I guess other people might have experienced that, stepping up can be challenging at times, but it sounds like you've got a great, yeah, relationship with them. So that was been managed really well. Um, let's talk about sustainability because I know the date category has a real sustainability story. Can you tell us a bit more about why that is, and then whether that resonates with today's consumer?
Yeah, yeah. So dates, just by the way that they are grown and all the growing practices, is we don't really have to go out of our way to be sustainable, which is really nice. And so, like, things like tree trimmings and all the work that we do, there's always a use for it. Like, we can grind tree trimmings back into the ground, which helps build up the carbon content as things decompose and whatnot. So that's sustainable. We do a lot of drip irrigation, but we also still do flood irrigation, which is essentially you open up a hydrant and flood a field, and then the water kind of soaks into the ground. But that is actually, people might see it as waste, but when you only have to do that, 2 or 3 times throughout the harvest season versus drip having, kind of almost always on type thing. Both of them have their benefits, and it really comes down to the soil content on which one works better for which kind of soil. So there's a lot of sustainability there. There's in our product and innovation, we try to find ways to use what we can't sell as like a premium in package date to make other products like date rolls. So we're always trying to think of ways, how can we use we'll call them the seconds of the date harvest, and continue to make products out of that, so that we're not just either sitting on it or throwing it away. Um, and so there's a lot of that. And so I think consumers really, um, they like to know that a company is being sustainable. I don't know that they like to get in, at least not broadly, get into the details, because everybody's got focuses everywhere else in their life. Like, who's got time to study why are dates sustainable?
Yeah.
But knowing that it's part of our story, and part of just naturally how we grow. Um, and then a few years ago we converted most of our farms to organic, and really we didn't really change much in terms of practices. It was more of filling out the paperwork that we had to for the USDA for a few years. just to make sure that we had that record of consistency and whatnot. And, that was not a very challenging process for us. So for a lot of others where growing organic means, you have to change fertilizers or you can't use pesticides anymore is a lot more challenging for those groups, because we just don't have a lot of those headaches that they have in terms of infestation and whatnot.
Would you say the organic label then has helped with the growth and the additional consumption for the
Yeah,
product?
absolutely. I think as we converted on the farming side to more organic, on the sales side, obviously we started selling and pushing more organic product and really telling the story on why organics was growing. And we've seen, I want to say, triple digit growth on our organic side at US retail over the past couple of years,
Nice.
um, and really kind of help transition the whole category to a more organic focus, which has been really cool to see that, when we've been challenged with selling more organic, we met the challenge and we've been very successful at it.
And you mentioned about using the any waste product to create other products. So can you give me examples of what you have or potentially could do with that?
Yeah, so we make a product that we call mini Medjools, which is basically ground up dates, date paste rolled in coconut, or we do a cacao pecan one that has cacao and is rolled in pecan pieces. So those are our two main ones. We've done some innovation over the years that hasn't stuck. Like we had a chopped chocolate covered date, which, people who have had it still come to me and like, do you have any of that? Are you still selling it? We want it. It was so good. But ultimately at retail, it didn't do great in the produce set. And so I think there was opportunities there where we could have done things differently. And then we did a partnership with Tahine. I want to say about 2 years ago, and we had a Tahine season date slice, which again was really good, and it did pretty well in certain markets. But at the end of the day, it wasn't performing well enough to keep it around. But so we're always trying to think of innovation and new items that we can go to market with. And I think in the next year we'll probably have a few more come out
Mhm.
that will probably be more closely related to our date rolls, since those do well. We'll probably come out with some new flavors of that, and be able to continue to use up all of those seconds.
You've talked a lot about wanting to make dates more fun and accessible, so not just positioning them as a health food. Where do you think produce marketing as a whole gets that wrong, or what could they do differently? What does good actually look like?
Yeah. So I think, while we value and do focus on the healthy aspects of it, I think one of the things that I learned at General Mills, there was one of the, I want to say, consumer insights leaders who used to do this thing called the potluck throwdown, right? And it's like, how do you think of your consumer going to a potluck, taking a dish, using your product, and kind of winning the cook-off, so to say, and like having the favorite dish and the pride that comes along with that. Being a Midwesterner, cookouts and potlucks are, part of our culture. And so that kind of resonated with me. And so how do we make it more fun is, how do we get people to take dates and give them recipe inspiration where they can then take that to, a gathering or a cookout and have people just rave about it and like, oh my gosh, you got to bring that every time now. When I go, I take dates stuffed with a spicy cream cheese on a jalapeno wrapped in bacon, and I smoke them. And every time I go anywhere now, people require me to bring that
Yeah,
with me
sounds
because
amazing.
it is so good. And so I think that's how you make it more fun. You make it more social, you make it more engaging, you make it a part of the conversation.
And it's different, isn't it? If I had someone that brought, like you say, something similar to that every time they came around, I mean, yeah, you're going to remember them. You're going to want them to come more often.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
gonna want to make it yourself too.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so for someone in produce marketing or even sales, for example, who wants to move into a more strategic or leadership role, what advice would you give? So is there one thing that they could do that could accelerate their journey?
Yeah. I think it's primarily, I think you got to ask for your seat at the table. Really, you got to ask to be involved in the leadership meetings. But again, you can't just ask and expect to be there. You got to bring value too. You got to like, okay, you want to come to this meeting. Why? What are you going to do? What value? Like even like, hey, can I take notes in that meeting? Can I be the secretary? Can I help, manage the follow-ups or do the things just so I can get exposure and experience at, either the executive leadership level or even the board level, depending on where you're at in your organization, and just be willing to add value and take something off of their plate, because we're all, chasing cats and trying to herd them all and got so many things on our plate that if somebody came along and said, hey, I'd really like to do that for you as long as I can, be a part of this and just to get some exposure. Because the more you're seen and the more value you add is going to ultimately what gets you kind of recognized and where people are going to see you.
Was there something that you did in your past similar to that again helps you accelerate your career?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I didn't just not say no to a lot of opportunities. I went and looked for opportunities and, can I go to the grower meeting this time? Can I present the marketing plan at the grower meeting? Can I, do this? Can I do that? And I think a lot of that is what got my name out there in this group and kind of what, ultimately how I was continued to move up was continuing to add value at every step, and adding value beyond your role is ultimately how you get promoted, right? You got to kind of do the job you want before you're hired to do the job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is kind of the old adage. And so that's kind of how I've approached things here.
And not just sit back and wait for it to happen, go out and
Exactly.
what you're adding value, ask and make that
Yeah.
ambition
Yeah.
known,
And
essentially.
And I think the other part of it is being willing to celebrate your successes is probably my biggest challenge of,
Mhm.
I had a former VP when I was very young in my career. He's like, look, nobody else is going to pat you on the back, so you got to do it for yourself. So while you might be adding a lot of value and doing a lot of things, like people are busy, they might not always see it. So in your one-on-ones or your annual reviews, you got to make sure that you're able to articulate, what did you do and what was the value that you brought and how did you potentially go above and beyond your role, and then being able to ask in those meetings for, what do I need to do to get to that next level, kind of stuff like that.
Great. No, good advice. Thank you. Well, I think that's everything for today. So, yeah, thank you so much. It's genuinely been a great conversation. So, if people want to reach out, if they want to, follow Natural Delights, are you happy for them to either connect with you on LinkedIn or message you personally?
Yeah, absolutely. People can find me on LinkedIn. Again, David Baxter, and then you can follow our Natural Lights brands on social is at ND Medjool Dates. If you're interested in following along the journey as we continue on.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for joining me on Behind the Fruit.
All right, thank you. It's been a great conversation.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Fruit, a podcast by LCR International. We are global experts in fresh produce executive search. Hit subscribe if you enjoyed this episode, and for more industry insights, connect with us on LinkedIn.